like you're getting one. Gave me the paint and said, if you want a pair, here's the paint, here's the stick.
That's funny. That's fun.
So it's just glue on there.
The fried one.
Yes. What's next? Pick something next. Oh, now that looks like a Cambridge candlestick. It is the Cambridge mold. If you notice, the milk glass one is exactly the same. Where, if you notice the top, very top of it, how it's in 1958, they reworked the mold in Cambridge, and they made that. When they closed in 58, that mold went to Imperial, but Imperial didn't make these. Imperial never made them. In 1984, when Imperial closed, Summit Art Glass bought that mold. And they made them in Vaseline, in cobalt blue, and in Rubina. But they had so much trouble with the Rubina that they only made, there's very few were produced. And they made one pair of pink. And the pink ones came up on eBay, and I'm like, Summit never made these. And I talked to the owners. I talked to the people that were making them. They never made pink. And I'm like, who got this molded? And the Summit family, when Mr. Vogelsong died, they sold that mold to the Cambridge collectors. And Cambridge has not produced them since then. I keep bugging them to, but they haven't. And I'm like, where did this pink one come from? So I called, I bid, and I got them. And everybody was saying, oh, they've got to be original pink ones in the 150s. But they're not, because they had that bigger cup. And they weren't making pink in the 50s. So I called the owner, and she's like, oh, Mrs. Vogelsong gave those to me. She told me they were the only ones. Now, she didn't put any of this in the ad. She said they were testing the color to see if they liked it. They didn't like it. So she donated them to a charity so they could be sold for this charity. And that's how the woman got them through Mrs. Vogelsong. So I have a pink pair. Don't know if they're the only ones, but it's kind of neat to be able to find a color that I didn't have. And what's next? Okay, Westmoreland. Now this mold, this 1049 mold, those are both Westmoreland colors, 70s into the 80s. Westmoreland closed in 1984, and Desel Viking bought the mold. And they started making them, and like the red one over there is Desel Viking. The black with the acid etch on it is Desel Viking. Now the black ones that were acid were only sold in the gift shop. They sold straight black ones. There is a black one over there that is actually Westmoreland's. It has the WG on it. Viking took the WG off. And then when Viking closed, the mold was bought by Mosser Glass. And there's a couple there. There's a pink and the color that changes in fluorescent. Diachromic.
Neodymium.
Yeah. Those are Mossers. They produced them late 1990s into the 2000s. They still have the mold. I have been bugging them. I wanted to buy a full turn of them in a color, and they keep putting me off and putting me off and putting me off because Mr. Mosser does not like using that mold. And one of his employees said, well, when he passes, we'll probably make him again. So it's but it's a fun thing. And what's at the very end, there's getting into the 2000s, there is that one was made by, of all places, Pearpoint in 2005, which I didn't even know at that time that they were making stuff. It's made for the Sandwich Glass Museum, and it says SGM on the bottom. And so there's one over here that's actually sandwich glass in the milk glass. And then the reproduction made from the same mold, 190 years later. That one's kind of unusual. That was made in about 2005 in Russia. And they're cut, and they're lead. They're 24% lead crystal. They're a nice pair, a little bit different in style. but the only ones I've ever found from Russia. Is that at the end?
Yep.
All right. Any questions? Yes.
You did a great job talking to us about some of the markings at this section, but are any of these early pieces marked?
No. Oh, I'm sorry. She said that on that side, I talked about the markings and what they're marked, and are any of these marked on this side? Basically, no. They weren't, like, Heisey wasn't marking a Heisey because they were trying to sell them to antique dealers to sell as originals. Most of these others were the same thing. The only one that was really different was the Cambridge Stratfords. They wanted to make something that was never made before, but they still didn't mark it with the C and the diamond and the triangle. So no, probably the earliest, I would say, was the IGs from the 50s, Imperial glass from the 50s. That kind of started it. Really, it's kind of sad to say, but these glass houses wanted to sell these to people to fool the general public into believing they were much older than they were. And now, these reproductions are 100 years. Some of them are 100 years old. So.
Zach, there's a question behind you.
Oh, yes.
Did Imperial ever use the Heisey molds, or?
No. From what I could understand, from what I found out, the Heisey molds were actually melted down for World War II because they weren't making them anymore, so they stopped. So those molds were destroyed. All the Imperial did buy a lot of Heisey molds, but it was later stuff from the 50s. So those molds were already destroyed. But very good question. Yes?
I bought one of these once somewhere, and then I decided to research it, and I just wanted to come up and see, because I'm way back.
Oh, sure.
You have a couple in red. I heard they were, mine was red, and my research said the reds are all reproduction or fakes.
Well, and they're not really fakes. They're good glass houses making good dolphins, but later time period. So you can find reds that were Viking, and Viking made the best red ever. And Mosser made red using Viking's formula. Because if you could buy Mosser glass today in red, that's Viking's formula. The only other red that I know of is Carmen. And those would be the earliest. Those would be 1930s. They made them in forest green, Carmen, and cobalt blue in the 150s. The Carmen are very hard to find. There's not many of the Mosser ones out there either, or the Viking ones. So if you find a red dolphin, it's a good dolphin.
Okay, thank you.
Ah. Anybody? Yes?
Did you buy the candlesticks as pairs or only singles?
Well, I have mainly all pairs, but it's been a mix. I buy them as pairs, but then I also make them too. I find, one, if it's a rare one like the Rubina, bought the first one from Lynn Welker. You probably all know Lynn, it's for Cambridge. And, God, it wasn't cheap. It was like $500 for the single one. And then I found another one. A lady had collected. She was looking for a mate to it. So she wanted to buy mine, and I'm like, I wouldn't sell it. And she wouldn't sell it because she was going to look. So for 5 years, Stephanie and I went back and forth. Sell me that dolphin. No, you sell it to me. So she finally sold it to me. And I paid $500 for that one too. So now I have a pair, and they're perfect. They match beautifully. They really do. So I do buy them that way. Yes.
So mostly they were molded, but you indicated there were one or two that were in separate pieces, and there was a
early
biscuit
ones.
from.
The candle cup from about here up was a separate mold, and then they fitted them together with a piece of a molten glass. Now that was done because they couldn't actually get, a mold. They couldn't get the glass through the entire mold. So they did the two pieces, put them together. That's why in some of the really early ones, you'll see a lot of two color, where the candle cups one color, the base is another. I actually don't have any of those, but, and then in the 20s, the companies that were reproducing, they did it the same way, because they wanted this to be so authentic that the average buyer could not tell the difference. Cambridge is the one that really started with like this. They started, it was all one piece, one mold, all one piece. And some of their early ones, if you look at them, right here in the tail, there is like a line. And some people say it's cracked, and it's not cracked. What it is when they were pouring the glass into the mold, the top part of the tail and the bottom part of the tail met each other at different temperatures. So it made a line. It's not really a crack, the glass is fused, but it made a line there. And I think, but one of the blue ones, one of these, the earlier colors of Cambridge did that. Then they perfected it, and you don't ever see it in later years. Yes, anybody?
Zac, are there any dolphins in this book,
What's that?
in my book? Consolidated?
Do they show them in there?
I don't know.
I'm not really sure. I think they think they are in there.
Are they?
Now, if you find a real consolidated dolphin, which looks like the Imperial,
Right.
you're gonna pay at least $1,000 each, if you can find it. And if you can find a consolidated collector that will give one up.
Yeah.
Because usually the only way they give them up is when they pass. And I've known like 3 or 4 sets that have been just willed to the next generation of consolidated collectors. Consolidated collectors and Phoenix collectors are very intense.
Yes, we are.
They are very intense.
I do have a red set of candlesticks, the tall ones, and the white milk glass, and they have the pointed
Yes,
bases.
and those would be Westmoreland.
Westmoreland.
The red would be Mosser or Dazzle
Do
Viking.
you think it'll be marked when I go look tonight?
Neither one will be marked.
No.
But if you come up and I'll show you the differences on the base.
Okay,
There is differences on the base between the two.
okay, great. I'll look for the rose.
All right, any other questions? Oh, yes,
Where do we buy the tickets for the raffle?
there's no tickets.
Yeah. How are we gonna?
I'm gonna ask a question, and the person who guesses the answer first gets to win
Oh my God.
the Amber Dolphin. So, of the ones on this table,
All right.
what candlestick do you think is the most valuable?
Oh boy.
That's the question. It is a dolphin, yes, that's very good, but not the winner, sorry.
Jan should know.
No, I would love that to be, but no, that's a $10 dolphin.
The Amberina?
The Rubina, you mean?
Yeah.
That's close, but not it.
Cambridge Vaseline.
It's your beard.
You know what? That's really close too, but not it. I'll give you hold on. What's that?
Jim wants to guess.
Heisey, Amber.
Bingo. That was gonna be my next thing I was gonna say was it's the most common and disliked color. For the table here, the last pair that I know sold for $7,000. It is Heisey collectors. They're rare colors like zircon. I told you 11,000 for a pair. The amber are as rare as the zircon, but they don't take that much money. They don't command that much because. Yeah, sure. Yes.
7,000 a pair.
Heisey made amber. Heisey made amber for. It was a railroad line, and that's all they made it for. But they did produce like 40 of those. Yes.
Is that 7,000 for one? Or
That's for a pair.
That
That's
is
for a pair. So now the zircon one sold about 6 years ago. A pair sold for 11,000 for the pair.
Just as a contrast.
Now moon gleam would be between 1,000 and 1,400. The clear, if you bought a pair of clear, you're talking 250, 300. Flamingo, there's a pair on eBay for 400. right now. So, you know, it varies. Cobalt's up there, Cobalt's like 1,500. Sahara's pretty high, that's like 3,000 a pair.
How many do you have?
Total, I have about 150
Is that
different
pairs or
pairs.
six? Pairs, so
Yes.
300, wow.
There's 90 here, and I have about 60 more that I didn't bring.
Wow.
You know, it's funny, the Westmorelands are all out, the foreign ones are all out, the Cambridge ones are all out. The Imperial ones are in boxes in the basement. You know? They originally were out, and I kind of packed them away, put other stuff out, and now they live there. Yes, ma'am.
Do you have a favorite?
What's that?
Do you have a favorite?
Well, you know, I started off, well, I've collected since I was like 10 of stuff. And since I was 16, I've collected Vaseline glass. That's why I'm writing the book on uranium glass. So I would say the Cambridge, because of how rare they are, there was 4 of them in a factory worker's house. 2 of them went to the Bennett Museum, if you remember the Bennett Cambridge Museum. 2 of them went to a private collector. Years later, when Bennett closed, that private collector purchased the other pair and sold them to me, and his pair are in the Cambridge Museum. So that's Lynn Welker. And, yeah, so it's, I would say that's my favorite. I mean, I have a lot of them, and you know, they're like your kids. You know, it's, but I collect so many things. Way too many. Any other questions or? No? Well, I thank you so much. You gotta get out of
Thank you, Zach and Paul. Thank you, it was a very.
Vanna.
What is it?
Vanna.
Vanna, oh, Vanna. There you go. Okay, just a couple more announcements.